Not so forbidden love? How life was really like for homosexuals in the Puritan era. In Puritan society, homosexuals were tolerated but never accepted. By Paul Geraldo and Cohere Elliston.
For the Puritans, the God-centered life meant making the quest for spiritual and moral holiness for the great business of life.
The rigorous Puritans strived to apply their religion to their society. They abided by the Bible's teachings as best they could. In Puritan New England, where the courts were an extended arm of the church, the Bible highly influenced laws and beliefs. Grave sins were often punished as capital crimes. Sodomy, sexual intercourse between men involving anal or oral copulation, was viewed as an obscenity. It went against everything that was natural.
Christian teachings claimed that sex was only for procreation, not for pleasure or to satisfy lust, as this was deviant. This was, they said, what God had intended.
The modern notion of sexuality is a distinct and pivotal aspect of human identity that gives rise to sexual urges and acts had no place in their ideological framework.
The concept of sex being used as a sensual outlet used for expressing sexuality was not even considered by colonists in this time period. The words homosexual and heterosexual did not even exist in the vocabulary. It was believed that anyone was willing to commit homosexual acts just for the fun of it. It was not a common notion that a person could love someone of the same sex, nevertheless, some did suspect it. Because of the lack of a gay identity, homosexuals were not persecuted in this society.
Preachers sermoned fervently against acts of homosexuality, declaring them as filthy and vile, rebellious to God's wishes, and against the standard way of life. The church claimed that, for this offense, due punishment would come, and these sinners would be sent to hell.
Their females exchanged natural relations for unnatural, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with females and burned with lust for one another. They are filled with every form of wickedness, evil, greed, and malice. Harvard professor Michael Wigglesworth struggled his whole life with the emerging feelings that drew him towards men, more specifically his male students. The Puritan believed that these urges represented an inclination to sin, and an unclean soul made many possible homosexuals very homoerotic thoughts and feelings.
Even sodomy and buggery have broken forth in this land oftener than once. While these beliefs inflicted fear in the community and kept many from acting on their desires, there was still a good amount of colonists who did not resist their urges. Men often were housed together, and there was a greater ratio of men to women. These factors contributed to the number of sodomites and male homosexuals in the colony. These chaste acts were done sneakily and in private, hidden from the eyes of the community. But what happened when people were caught red-handed?
If a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death, their blood is upon them.
Connecticut, along with Massachusetts and New Hampshire, quoted Leviticus when referring to sodomy. The Blue Laws of Connecticut, in charge of dealing out punishments for moral infractions, deemed sodomy a capital crime, worthy of the death penalty. This crime was considered even worse than adultery and equivalent to murder. It is interesting, then, that with a number of these affairs going on, only a few cases were prosecuted in the court, with only one person every 7 years brought to trial.
Even queerer is that only 3 men were executed for acts of homosexuality in America's colonial period: William Plain, John Knight, and Jean Creole. In truth, while homosexual acts were against legal code, most were often left unchecked by the court. If a guilty party was brought forward to the court, it would often just be sentenced with a lesser, more lenient crime. Thus, the accused would not receive such a harsh punishment and would instead be whipped, publicly humiliated, or in severe cases, banished from the colony.
This shows that there was a leniency towards the gay community that, according to Christianity, should not have been there. In 1637, John Alexander and Thomas Roberts of New Plymouth Colony were found guilty of sodomitical acts. Roberts, an ex-indentured servant, was severely whipped, returned to his old master, and deprived of the right to own land. Alexander, the instigator, who was said to allure others into homosexual acts, was severely whipped, branded a sodomite, and banished from the colony. This was considered a severe case. Yet, the Puritan courts still found it unnecessary to turn to the death penalty.
It is speculated that the capital punishment was not enforced in Puritan society because of the Puritans' aversion to it. They were disgusted by it.
One of the tenets of Puritanism said that humans were not born perfect, but full of flaws. This allowed Puritans to be more compassionate and tolerant when dealing with sodomists. To them, sinning was an inevitable part of life. Erotic urges towards members of one's own sex were thought by the Puritans to be a temptation inherent in all persons. Puritan society mostly saw sodomites as perverted sinners, but still as human beings who were part of the community no less.
Ordinary townsfolk and villagers, whilst not approving of homosexuality, were often willing to tolerate people in their midst who were known to be attracted to people of the same sex if they were otherwise valued members of the community, a good neighbor in times of need, a good employer, and so on. But if those known to be a homosexual were, in other respects, problematic and disruptive, they could find themselves prosecuted for sodomy.
One of the only men executed for sodomy was William Plain. In 1646, he was convicted of corrupting the youth of Guilford, New Haven, by encouraging them to masturbate and by doing so himself in public. Plain was a man who often questioned God and his actions, and whether or not there was a God. It is speculated whether his agnostic beliefs tipped the scales out of his favor and led the courts to decide his execution. His doubts challenged the church, therefore threatening the government, as New Haven had a Puritan theocracy like the rest of New England.
In 1677, Nicholas Senchen was accused of sodomy in Windsor, Connecticut. He was widely known for seeking out sexual contacts with men and boys in town for almost 40 years. His case should have landed him with a severe disciplining, yet his wealth allowed him to escape punishment farther than paying a 300-pound fine.
Jan Creoli was a black man who was convicted of sodomizing a boy named Mango Congo. As punishment, Creoli was brutally choked to death, and his body was burned to ashes, a punishment much harsher than the others.
The notion that one's social status, race, or beliefs influence the severity of the penalty is enforced by the cases of William Plain, Nicholas Senchen, and Jean Creoli. A vagrant was much more likely to be committed for sexual crimes than a wealthy proprietor. Those who were not Caucasian received harsher treatment and garnered less sympathy. If found a threat to the theocracy, one was considered a danger to the community, a troublemaker in a sense.
The offending homosexual's liberty, his fate, depended on who he was. Nevertheless, there was still a significant difference between the way of life for homosexuals in the Puritan era and how it would have been if the courts had followed Scripture. While Puritans strived for piety, they did not follow the Bible word by word. The fact that the community pardoned sodomy a majority of the time and did not persecute homosexuals showed just that. If the society were fanatic, many homosexuals would not even have had the right to live, and countless lives would have been lost.
Homosexuals in Puritan society, despite being tolerated, were deprived of many of the benefits that heterosexual couples had, such as publicly expressing their loves, engaging in sexual acts without legal retribution, and marrying.
Countless men forced themselves to repress their true feelings, locked inside the closet, so to speak. Thus, not only were they neglecting their fancies, but they were burying a part of themselves, of their identity. Homosexuals did not have the right to be themselves in this era, even with one as lenient as the Puritans. One might argue that life was not as bad for them compared to what could have been. Yet, a lifetime spent not able to freely experience love or passion, a lifetime spent being reticent and repressed, is not a life fully lived.